Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this live stream event. Before we begin, I'd like to share just a couple of resources with you. So our code of conduct, Microsoft Reactor seeks to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and our presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but we just ask that you're mindful of your commentary remaining professional and on topic. This session is recorded. It will be available for on-demand access on the YouTube channel within 48 to 72 hours. If you've not been on a live stream with us before with YouTube, you do need to have an account created on YouTube to interact in the chat. So if you haven't done that yet, recommend doing so now. If you are unable to get your questions answered during this live session, do feel free to find us the Microsoft Reactor online. We're available through Meetup, and you can send us a message there. Which brings us to today's session. The Reactor is happy to be joined by Sydney Andrews again for their third series, the third session of their three-part series, excuse me. And today's session will be automating the deployment of ARM templates in your DevOps workflow. So let me bring Sydney up on the screen. Here we go. Welcome, Sydney. Welcome back for the third part.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to just jump in.
Of course, yeah. Let me pull up your slides here and let you go from here.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for a wonderful introduction. Hey, everyone. Glad to be back on again. This is the third part of a three-part series. So I'm going to make a lot of assumptions. I'm going to write a lot of code, and I'm going to do a little bit of ad hoc, just trying things out as we go. So this is going to be a very demo-heavy session. If I'm talking about terminology or concepts that may be new to, please, put a question in the YouTube chat. We'd love to answer questions. If you are watching this video and it's a recording, definitely check out the first two parts of this three-part series. First part being the deploying using ARM, CLI, and Bicep templates. The second part being introduction to YAML GitHub Actions. Both of those build upon what we're going to do today, which is we're going to build up a web application. I'm just going to do a really simple .NET web app. We are going to Dockerize it. Then we're going to create a GitHub Actions workflow to automate the deployment of that web application to a container registry. Today, I'm going to choose Azure Container Registry. And then the part that I'm a little nervous about because I'm still a little new to this, I am going to create a Bicep template for a container instance. I've done it for other services before, but this is one I haven't really done as much. So I'm really excited, just as much as you're probably excited to watch this, to work on this while we're here. And we are going to automate the deployment. So that's my only slide. I'm going to go ahead and close my only slide. And basically, I have the Azure portal open. I have GitHub open where I can create a new repository. I have Windows Terminal, and I have Visual Studio Code. That's what we're going to be working with today. So I'll create a brand new GitHub repository. I'm going to call this April 6th. I'm not going to put anything in there. Just going to make a public repo, hit create repository. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Visual Studio Code, got an empty folder, going to open a Windows terminal, and I'm going to do .NET new web app. This is going to create a new web application using .NET 6. I believe it's going to be a Razor Pages application. So if I go to Visual Studio Code, I'll see that we have some pages using the Razor syntax. So it is Razor Pages. The exciting thing here is that I can prepare for Git by just doing really quick .NET new git ignore. That's just going to add a git ignore file so we don't accidentally, like if we build a project like using .NET build, we don't accidentally commit the bin and object folders and other folders that might be specific to our dev machine. And we're going to initialize a new repository, git init. And so we have our new repository with, this is our initial commit. We'll commit these changes to our local repository. But once they're committed to our local repository, we can use Visual Studio Code to publish it. But if you remember, when I create this repository in GitHub, they say, hey, you can push an existing repository from the command line. We'll do exactly that. We'll copy the commands here to do that. And I'll just clear my screen so you can see a little bit more, and I'll paste those commands here into Windows Terminal. Now, since this is a new repo, I will need to log in. It's going to prompt me to log in using my default browser. Hit enter. Sign in with your browser. Luckily, I was just in my browser, so it opened the correct one. I have a lot of browser windows open, and we are cooking. So if I go back here and refresh this repository, we now have a really simple .NET web app, and we can run this in a variety of different ways. We can .NET run, and it'll build the project and then run it. There's a localhost 7010. If I click on this, actually control click, excuse me, it'll open within my browser. Just a really simple ASP.NET Razor Pages sample application. We're not going to change it at all. We're not really here to learn about ASP.NET. We're really here to learn about automated deployment stuff. One other thing I want to call out is you can publish a .NET application. So .NET publish, you can select the configuration, wherever it has debug or release, and you can select the output folder. I'm going to just use out. Hit enter. It's going to publish application to two folders. One is the default one, which would be the bin folder, and the other one is our out folder. So if I want to run this, I could just say .NET out, and then the name of my project. One of the cool things is if you do .NET new and you don't specify the name of a project, you'll use your folder name. So I know there's an aprildemo.dll. So .NET out aprildemo.dll should run my application. I'll control click, and there's our running application. Now, I did that on purpose because I didn't want any ambiguity when we start building out our Docker file. So we're going to build a Docker file to Dockerize this application from, and this is where we start with our base container image. If you were here for session 1, you know we used the Microsoft Container Registry. So mcr.microsoft, got to spell it correctly, .com/.net/SDK 6.0. Now, you know that we use that container image from Docker Hub as our source base image. Now I'm going to alias this by or stage tag by using the name build, so that if I ever need to refer to this stage later, I can use that keyword build. Another thing you need to do is if you're building .NET container images is to set your working directory. If you don't, there's some issues you can run into with building it. But just say, hey, we're going to work in the app directory. So best practice, copy our CS project files from this local project into the working directory, which is // that's our working directory. Now, then we can run .NET restore. Now, why do we do that? Well, that creates a layer within Docker file of our NuGet restore packages. Now, if we need to go, let's say we change the code, but we don't change our NuGet packages, when it builds this Docker file, it can skip this layer because the CS project files haven't changed, but maybe some of our C# code has. Now, if you copy everything in and just do a .NET build, any change to any file in the project will require you to have to restore the packages, and that, especially if you're doing multiple builds on your dev machine, that's just wasted cycles. Let me show you another way to avoid wasted cycles. We're going to do a .gitignore file. Because by default, if we copy everything in, actually, not .gitignore, .docker, these Docker ignore. There we go. So by default, it will copy everything in this folder into our Docker container. We don't really need that out. We don't need the bin or object folders because we're going to build them within a Docker container. So we can just say any folder with the name bin should be excluded. Any folder with the name object should be excluded, and any folder with the name out. Where if it's lowercase or uppercase for the first letter, let's exclude all of that. So now we can just say, all right, the rest of this, and always look at the syntax. Copy all files from my local folder, obviously without the files from Docker ignore, into the working directory. And this time we're going to run .NET publish. So again, by doing these as different steps, if we don't change our CS project file, it can skip that NuGet restore for us. So .NET publish configuration, just like we did on our local command line. Configuration release, output out. Oh, I don't know why I recommended output. I'm going to just do out. All right. Whew. Now, this is where things get fun. We can publish this container image as it is, but we don't really need the SDK to run ASP.NET. We can always do from mcr.microsoft.com.net, and this time instead of SDK, we can use ASP image. Now this image is pretty cool because it just has the things required to run the ASP.NET application. So it's more than a runtime, but less than SDK. So if you're running a console app, you'll probably use runtime instead of ASP.NET. If you're doing something like Blazor, you don't even need the ASP.NET image. You can go all straight to Nginx, simply because you can build like a completely client-side web application that don't need anything .NET. But today, since this is just a .NET web application, we'll use ASP.NET. Just like we did before, we'll create a working directory, but this is where things get fun. We're going to copy, but instead of copying from our local machine, we're going to say from. We're going to copy from the build stage. Now, in the build stage, our working directory is app, and our project output from .NET Publish is in the out folder. So we're going to copy everything from our working directory /out folder, so app/out, into the current working directory. So, I mean, it's called app here, but I can call it pub if I want it. I mean, the name doesn't matter. But basically, copy everything from that out folder in the working directory of the build stage into the current working directory. And then entry point is basically when you run this container image, what command to run. Well, we know this one, .NET, comma, and it only has a single argument, the name of our DLL. So our project name is April Demo, so it should be aprildemo.dll. All right, whew, that's a big Docker file. But I like to walk everybody through everything I'm doing. I don't like demo magic at all. So Docker build tag. I'm gonna call this ASP.NET, ASP.NET Razor. And I'm going to build the current folder, or the Docker file in the current folder. So Docker build tag, this container image is going to be called ASP.NET Razor, and I'm going to build the current folder. Hit enter. All right, we're cooking now. Now, I backed up a little bit from my microphone, get a little bit closer. I apologize about that. All right, so pull down our SDK image, it switched to working directory, copied the CS project file, did any NuGet restores, it copied the rest of the project, ran .NET Publish, it spun up the second container image, which is ASP.NET, it copied everything from the build container image into the ASP.NET container image, and this ran faster than I could actually explain it. I just like if you've seen any builds using a less efficient template, they'll probably run a lot longer. So we should just be able to Docker run. We're going to detach this. We're going to run it in the background since it's a web application. And we'll publish a port. Within the container image, we have port 80, but on my local machine, I'm going to publish this as port 555580 ASP.NET Razor. We'll run that container image. All right. So if I got this right, I should just be able to go HTTP localhost 5555. And there's our running application. So we've done all the dev we need to do. Let's move from dev to GitHub Actions. So we have this April 6th repo, and this is where I go back to all the stuff we did in session 2, where we built our own YAML GitHub Actions workflows. We need to create a YAML file in the .github workflows folder. I'll call this deploy.yaml. And just starting, I'm gonna call it .NET continuous delivery. That's like one of the hardest words I've ever for me to spell. That's why everybody says CI/CD, right? On push, we're gonna run this workflow, and it has one job so far. This job is gonna be called build container. Now this is this job. I'll just give it a nice name: build and push Docker container image. And I'm writing a lot of code. So I'm going to take a second to pause and say, there's been links shared in the chat. We have links shared to a Microsoft Learn module. We have links shared to our GitHub gist. And what I will say is if the GitHub gist has all of this code that I'm writing. So don't try to screenshot and try to memorize or anything like that. Please use the GitHub gist, because if you see me looking off to the side, it's because I'm also looking at it, because I've been doing this for a long time, but even I have to, it's a lot of lines. So even I have to go and like, what was that one again? So definitely check out the GitHub gist. And then after the session is over, please, jump in, try the Microsoft Learn module that covers a lot of the same material. I'm moving quickly mostly because a lot of the stuff we covered in sessions 1 and sessions 2. So today is just all about putting it all together. All right, so our job has a nice name. We're going to run on Ubuntu latest, and we're going to add some steps. The first step is going to be a really simple. That's our actions checkout at v3, and I like to give them names: checkout, repository, code. And then from there, we can start using other actions. So everything you've seen so far is stuff you've already seen. But I'm going to introduce you to github.com/docker. This is the Docker org within github.com with all their wonderful actions. And look, there's a build push action that allows you to build and push a Docker container image. Lots of examples of how to do it, but if you scroll down, basically, if you have a container registry, you log in and then you run Docker build push action at v2. And then there's a push parameter. You indicate where that's true or false, any tags you want to use, and a context parameter if you're doing a different directory. All right, so we're going to grab the name of this action. And again, just build upon everything we've done in the past. Uses Docker build push action. And somebody's laughing. You got to look at the notes. Someone's laughing at me looking at the notes. So they have to do the same thing. Yeah, you got to look at the notes, right? The show notes are the best part, right? And I love having show notes because everybody else can follow along and doesn't seem like black magic what I'm doing. All right, so we have Docker build push action. We'll name this build Docker container image with, and I'm going to just set 2 parameters: context, just like when we did Docker build and we specified tag and then we did dot. We could have just did Docker build dot. I think that still works. I'm testing my theory. It'll just build our container image. So we're going to do the GitHub Actions equivalent of this. So Docker build, context is dot, and then this is really important. I'm going to set push to false. We're just building. We're validating that GitHub Actions can build our Docker container image. So, I'm really nervous, but I'm looking. There's my out folder. One thing I noticed is that my out folder is getting ready to be committed to GitHub. I don't really want that, so I'm going to go to my git ignore, and just like we have, we exclude the bin object folder. I will exclude that out folder. Save that. And there we go. 4 changes. There's our deploy YAML file, our Docker file, our git ignore, and our Docker ignore. All right. Go forth and Docker build. Exclamation point. Take our changes up from local repo to GitHub. And we are now cooking. So if I go to my repo in GitHub and I go to actions, go forth and Docker build. Is using those nice names we get: .NET continuous delivery, build and push Docker container image. Probably should just call it build Docker container image, but you know what? We're going to push eventually, so we'll leave the name. All right, so it's looking for an agent. Once it gets a job agent, it's going to run the job. So it checks out our code from our repository. Now it's building the Docker container image. There's step 1 in getting .NET SDK. I believe at this point we'll also got .NET ASP.NET at this point. Then after it gets that, working directory app, copy CS project, restore NuGet packages, copy the rest of the code, build using .NET publish, does the next from, copy from build to the pub image, and everything's cooking. We have built our Docker container successfully. Now remember, we set push to false, so it builds it, but doesn't do anything in it. It doesn't tag it, it doesn't push it to container registry. But I would like to push it to a container registry. So I'm going to temporarily create a container registry, and I'll destroy all this after today's live session. So I'm not worried about anybody, getting my credentials, getting in. But I'm going to go to the Azure portal. I'm going to select create a resource. Go to containers, and I'm going to create a Azure container registry, or ACR. Now, for my resource group, I'll say April. Got to spell correctly today, Sydney. April 6. Be the name of my resource group. The registry name will be Reactor Only 6. Just like that name. Please let that be unique. Yes, globally unique. All right, where am I going to deploy it to? East US, because I'm on the East Coast. And I can set up other things, but I'll set the SKU to basic. Nothing too crazy here. Review and create. All sorts of settings set up. I hit create, and there goes my container registry. Now, this usually doesn't take very long to spin up, but if you wanted to look at the JSON template for how they create it, you could. It's lots of settings there, but it's already ready, so we don't have to do all that. Here's Reactor on the 6, our Azure Container Registry. It doesn't have any container repos in here yet, but we will create one. We'll go to access keys and we'll enable the admin user. This allows us to use a username and a password to log into this container registry. Again, I'll destroy this after the session, so I'm not too worried about you seeing it. All right, so I'm going to copy to clipboard my password. They're going to jump into my GitHub repo, and we're going to use secrets, much like we did in session 2 when we used secrets with the Azure CLI. We'll go to settings. This is where things get fun. We will go down our secrets for actions, and create a new repository secret. All right, Docker registry password could be the name of my secret, and I'll just paste in that password and add that secret. Apologies for hitting the mic. I'll create another secret. This one is going to be the name of the username, which is the same as the name of the container registry. I'll call this Docker registry identifier. Add secret. And now I have 2 secrets. I'm going to copy this name because I'm surely going to misspell identifier. All right, let's go implement this. So Docker has a build push action, but if you go back to that Docker organization, you'll notice they have a login action that comes before. By default, if you don't specify a server, login's going to log into Docker Hub. But if you go to Docker and just search for login action or just login, you can actually read the documentation for here. And they actually tell you, here's how to log into different container registries. One of them being Azure Container Registry. So, I mean, that's a winner, right? We use Docker login action at v1, a registry, .azurecr.io, username and password. So, I mean, I should just be able to do this. Copy it like that, go in here, and add my login action before my build push action. So Docker login action to v1. I need the registry name and then 2 secrets. So this is where things get fun. I'm going to go back to Azure Portal. Here's my login server, reactor on the 6.azurecr.io. That's easy. That's my registry name. For my username and password, they recommend Azure Client ID, Azure Client Secret. I called them something else. I called them Docker Registry Identifier and then Docker Registry Password. So just jump back in. And then this time, instead of just put building, I'll turn push to true. And then there was one more flag we saw when we looked at documentation. That's tags. This allows us to specify multiple tags. So I can say reactor on the 6.azurecr.io /ASP.NET latest. Or I could do the same thing. Reactor on the 6.azurecr.io ASP.NET But maybe I want to do some string formatting or concatenation and just add the GitHub.run number. That way, every time I build this, it creates and pushes a new container image using the GitHub run number as a tag, and also replaces the alias to latest. So we're going to build, we're going to push, everybody's going to be happy. This time, maybe build and push Docker container image, build and push to ACR. Maybe for the Docker login action, I'll say log in to ACR. And that's, I mean, we got good labels. We got our workflow built out. Let's push it. Good enough to ship, right? So syncing things up. Go to GitHub Actions. There's push it. Really hoping right now I don't have any really annoying typos, but I think it will be all right. So there's a build and push Docker container image. Login to Azure Container Registry. Looks, if I go up here and click on login to ACR, you'll see that it says login succeeded. So that was successful. Build and push to ACR. So it's building the container image just like we did before. And then once it's done building, it's going to immediately push this container image up to Azure Container Registry using the tags we specified. There we go. Pushing layers. It's still pretty big, but it's not as big as it could have been. Like there's more improvements we can make to this workflow. Like we can use the Alpine container images, we can use Blazor and make the final container image based on Nginx, all sorts of stuff we could do. All right, Reactor on the 6. If we go to repositories, there's an ASP.NET Razor repository. There's the latest tag and GitHub run number, so the 2 tag. So again, we're automatically building and pushing the Azure Container Registry. Pretty awesome stuff. But you came here to see how I can incorporate this into a Azure Resource Manager deployment using a template. And we're going to do just that using a Bicep template. So to keep things simple, we're going to build upon what we learned before. So we'll create a new job. We'll call this deploy template. The name is deploy Bicep template to Azure. Runs on Ubuntu latest. And this needs a build container to run first before this runs. Then we'll add our steps array. We're going to do the same thing we did in session 2, which is instead of going to the Docker organization, we'll go to the Azure organization, and they have a wonderful login action that allows you to log into the Azure CLI. And it's not super complicated. Azure login at V1 with credentials, and then you pass in your Azure credentials. Grab that. Uses with credentials. So we're Azure login using Azure credentials. Now I'm going to go back to my GitHub repository and create a new secret for this. So secrets. And I'm doing it this way, but there's all sorts of different ways you can add secrets and stuff like that. You can integrate with different platforms. So I'm just showing you the path of least friction, but there's definitely other ways you can do this. Now I'm going fast through this part because we just did this last week when we talked about GitHub Actions and log into the Azure CLI. So I am going to AZ group show name April 6. I'm already logged into the Azure CLI. That's our metadata about the resource group April 6. When I create a service principal, I'm going to want this scope. So I need to extract that out. So let's see, query. Let's make the query ID, output TSP. Okay. Let's try ID equals. Actually, let's try that same command again. We're storing a variable called ID. And let's echo ID out. So just showing you I did AZ group show, I did output from the CLI, I created a specific property, and I stored it in a variable in my shell choice. It'd be a little bit different if you're doing this in a bash shell. I'm doing it in a PowerShell shell. Redundancy intended. All right, AZADSP create for RBAC. If you haven't seen this before, we did this in session 2. The name, I'm going to call it April 6. SDK off because we plan to use this with the CLI. Role, we're going to be a contributor. We can contribute things to this resource group. Scopes, well, that's where I give it the ID of the resource group. So for this resource group, we use an ID for scopes. We're going to be a contributor. We're enabling this service principal for SDK off, and it's called April 6. Hit enter. Pending no typos. There we go. We're cooking. So there's our JSON array for our credentials. I'm going to copy that. Go back into here and add that secret. And now we have access to the Azure credential secrets. I'm down here. I think we're cooking. Let's test logging into Azure. Commit that up. See our changes up. And we go back to GitHub, click on Actions. It's going to still do the container build, all that stuff, this stuff. But when the container build is done, it's going to try logging into Azure. And the only thing we care about at this point is that we get a login succeeded. Taking a water break. This is a good moment if you haven't opened up the show notes. They're on our GitHub gist. If you have questions, please throw them in the chat. This is a lot, but the exciting part is this is everything I'm showing you now. I've shown you in sessions 1 and 2. We're just putting it all together and kind of building. So it's kind of almost workshopping it, right? We're building a bigger solution for everything we learned. So we are cooking fast. We build and push the Docker container image. Now we are, I know the job is called deploy bicep template to Azure, but the only thing we're doing at this point is testing that we can actually log in. to the Azure CLI. So jobs being set up, running Azure login. Fingers crossed, don't mess it up. We set our Azure cloud. Login successful. So we're logged into the Azure CLI. Let's actually walk through what we want to do here. So I'm going to do something a little controversial. I'm going to go to github.com/new to create another new repository. This one's called April 6 deploy. And for this one, I'm just going to initialize it with, I don't know, README file, hit create repository. And I'm going to edit this within GitHub code spaces just to keep things a little simple and keep us on our toes, right? All right, so I'm having a second repository, and this is where I'm going to put my Bicep file. Now, if I ever wanted to bring that repository locally, I could. As a matter of fact, why not? Let's actually bring this repository locally instead of doing GitHub code spaces, because I just realized not everybody will have access to GitHub code spaces. This is what I meant by doing things on the fly. So we'll clone this to a local machine. We will open up a new tab in PowerShell. Git clone. I'll call the folder April demo deploy. CD April demo deploy. Code dot. Open up this Visual Studio Code in that folder. And we have a README file. Don't care about that. Going to create a new file called container.bicep. Now, I want to be able to reference things using this container.bicep file. So I'm going to have a lot of fun. What I can do is I can go in and reference an existing resource. Now, so I can do that by going in and saying, you know what, resource registry, Microsoft.container registries. Let's do the 2021 1201 preview. That's the version we're going to do. Oh, looks like a little bit typo. Got a little happy. It says, okay, we need location, name, and SKU. Okay. The name of my container registry is Reactor on the 6. Location, well, I'll just say resource group dot location. It's going to give me yellow squigglies because it says, you know what? You should make that a parameter. Okay, fine. Param location string equals resource group location. All right, and then SKU. The name of our SKU is going to be basic. The only other thing I think we changed was for properties. Enable admin user. So theoretically, if I deploy this Bicep file, it will match the existing Reactor on the 6 registry and then just kind of move on and not actually make any changes. Let's test that theory out. So this is where we get to have a little bit of fun. AZ deployment, group create, name. The name of my resource group, I almost forgot. April 6th. Ooh, excuse me for the hiccup. And then the template file. That's going to be container.bicep. Hit enter. It's not name. The first argument is resource group. See, I was due for a demo bug. It's due for a demo bug. Somebody says, does anybody have a link for session 2 that I'm referring to? I'm sure somebody's gonna be able to put it in the chat. I don't have the link on me right now, but I'm sure we'll get somebody to throw it in the chat. All right, so we create a deployment to the April 6th resource group. So if I actually go to this resource group, this might be too fast. It looks like it already succeeded. There's our container deployment. And that's because this container registry already exists. Now that does a couple things for us in Bicep. And I'm not going to really focus on that today. But one of the cool things is now that we have this, we can actually use this registry variable. So do things like, registry.name when we're creating another resource so that we can look up like the username and password instead of having manually put it in. That's a really advanced Bicep feature. Definitely something you want to use when you're building more complex Bicep templates. But for today, we're going to keep things simple. We will create a container instance. So param app name string equals Sydney. Actually, let's just do unique string resource group .id. And then we're going to just create a new resource, call this container, Microsoft.containers. Use container instances, container groups at 2021, October 1st, 2021. It says, hey, at a minimum, you need name and properties. I'll do name location properties. So name, we'll use that at name parameter. Location, we'll use location. Properties, we'll create a properties object. And then now property says, oh, you need a lot of stuff. First off, you need an OS type. Okay, that one's easy. OS type Linux. And then a containers array. Now, there's other things we could put in here. Like, for instance, this is optional, but we could put in image registry credentials. This is a pretty cool object because we get to put in a server, a username, and a password. And if this looks familiar, that's because we just kind of did this already in our YAML. Now, we used secrets. And again, here in the Bicep file, we could actually just reference registry and look up the server username, password using functions. However, I found it that's kind of difficult to parse when we're demoing, so we'll do it manually. But I'm just letting you know you could do it automatically. You don't have to manually pop all this stuff in. So Reactor on the 6, access keys. I'll grab my login server. Again, you can look this up automatically, but we'll just keep it things simple today. I'll grab my username. And then finally, I'll grab my password. All right. Trying to make sure. Oh, image registry credentials is an array because you have credentials for multiple image registries. I'm so sorry about that. I was wondering why it's giving me squigglies. It'll say, hey, that's an array, not an object. We're only connected to one ACR instance, but if your organization had like 4 or 5 and you want to use containers for all of them, you could definitely do that. All right, there's our image registry credentials, and then we're going to create a container object. This is going to get a lot of fun. I'm not expecting you to memorize all of this, but it says for each container, you at least need to specify a name and properties. So I'll call this name web app properties. And that's an object. Now, here's a cool thing. There's a required properties. If I hit tab, it's going to pop in the properties that are absolutely required in order to move forward. So how much CPU? Let's do 1 core, 2 gigs of memory, and our image name. This is fun because we can actually look it up using this registry variable. But again, we're just going to keep things simple today. We will go to repositories, ASP.NET Razor, latest, and there's our image name that we need. We'll copy that, go back in here, and say there's our image name. We can add in other stuff. So, for instance, if I want to expose a port to the internet, I can do that. I can say we have resources image ports is what it's called. It's an array, so we need a port object. And that's going to have the port itself, 80, and a protocol, which should be TCP. One other thing we could do is we have an OS type image registry credentials in our containers. We can also expose a public IP address. So IP address object type public, a private if you're using a VNet. DS name label. If we're going to give this a globally unique name, what do we want to call it? Well, luckily we already have a unique name, app name. So we use that. Ports. What ports do we want to expose to the public internet? Well, this is a port object, so we can just do the same exact thing we did down here. Grab this. We're exposing port 80 from that container, and we're exposing that all the way out to the public instead of just into the container group. Whew, that was a big, complex Bicep template, but I don't see any squigglies. So if I save and I test this out, I should just be able to say AZ deployment group could create, I think I'll call this deployment test run. If I don't have any typos, it should start running. Really nervous. There we go. Starting. So if I go to April 6th resource group, Go up to deployments. There's our test run deployment. I'm really nervous about this, but it's working. You see our ARM JSON template based upon we did inputs and outputs, location app names are inputs. It's creating a container instance right now. And just checking over in the chat one more time. Make sure there's no more questions. Looks like you got that session 2 link, taking a water break. Once again, there's a GitHub gist if you want to see all this code I'm typing out. All right, let's go to our resource group. There is USIC complex name. There's our fully qualified domain name. I don't know why I said frequently qualified. Did everything correctly. I'm really nervous, but it should just work and go to that. And it's still spinning. I'll make sure I didn't screw up anything. Our container instance is running. There's our logs, our properties. We expose port 80 to the public internet. Not 100% sure why it didn't load up right away. I'll have to double check. Maybe there was a issue in my maybe a typo in how I configure it. But we're going to move forward because we're running near the end of our time. So I'm deleting this container instance. Luckily, that's really fast. And we're going to use this. So we have our bicep file. We're going to commit bicep. We're going to make a commitment to this repository. Sync changes up from a local repository to our remote. It says, hey, you should sign in with your browser. We'll do just that. And then if I got it correctly, I'll refresh here. There's our container.bicep file. Now, I don't need Visual Studio Code here anymore. That's all done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my original YAML file, and I'm going to implement the final steps to make this awesome. So I'm going to first use actions checkout code. Now, you said, hold on, you put this in a different repository. I absolutely did. So I'll say with repository, and this is where I'll specify the repository I want to use. So the name of our repository is C# run April 6 deploy. We're checking out code from an external repository. So I'll name it such. Checkout code, checkout external repository code. That's what I name this. I even named the Azure login. Login to Azure CLI. All right. And then just like we did in session 2, we'll do a run. And here's where things get fun. Easy deployment, group create. Resource group. I believe the resource group name we use is April 6. April 6. Template file. This is where I'll say container.bicep. And I'll do one more parameter. Name. Auto deploy hyphen. And I'll put in github.run number. That way we have a unique name for each automatic deployment. All right, we are going to name this deploy bicep template using Azure CLI. Save it. If I don't have any typos, this should automatically work. Deploy bicep and fingers crossed. All right, we're sending this up from a local repository to GitHub. There's a question. Somebody had a question about a Azure developer. I believe it's a question about the Cloud Skills Challenge. Yes, we had a Azure Developer Cloud Skills Challenge last month in March. It just wrapped up. The only video that's on YouTube is the initial video where we kicked it off. All the other sessions were office hours, so people were asking questions about their environment, working through, and that just didn't seem like the type of thing we wanted to publish or broadcast. So we do have the kickoff session. That's on YouTube. Definitely, go check that out. You can sign up for the Azure Developer Cloud Skills Challenge at any time. Highly recommend you give it a shot. You do 35 learn modules in 30 days. You get a 50% off voucher for the AC204 Azure Developer Certification. All right. Going into, this is fast. Already built, push a Docker container image. We're deploying a bicep template to Azure. log into Azure CLI, and I mean, we could prove that we built and deployed a container image by going to the Azure portal, ASP.NET Razor. There's build number 4. Let's see, log into Azure CLI. We checked out the code from our external repository, and AZ deployment group create April 6th container to Bicep out of deploy 4. So if I got this right, fingers crossed, we should have a new deployment called auto deploy 4. It's deploying a container image instance with that unique name that we talked about. So this is not going to run. We can definitely say, just kick off the deployment and return immediately. I just didn't do that for this example, but you probably will want to do that in your workflows. But here we go. We automatically kicked off a Azure Resource Manager template deployment using the GitHub Actions workflow. So we go to resource group. There is our container instance that we created automatically. There's a fully qualified domain name. And I think I messed up one of the settings, and that's why it's not actually rendering the website. Not exactly sure what setting I messed up. Maybe I missed a port or resource. I'm just double checking on my end where I may have messed that up. But I mean, we deployed this container instance. If we go to containers, we'll see that it's our Reactor on the 6 Azure CR container. Just out of curiosity, I'll just restart this just to see if that so yeah, I was due for a demo bug. Can't figure out what typo I made so that the container instance isn't actually running the web application. So I apologize about that. Looking, trying to make sure I didn't mess anything up. There's a properties. There's a public IP address. Try the IP address. There's a DNS name label, port 80, one container. Again, not exactly sure why the website's not rendering, because the container is definitely running and it's happy. Just out of curiosity, I will pull this container image locally. So just out of curiosity, we will open up a new Docker run detach publish port 6000, port 80, Azure CR.io, ASP.NET Razor latest. It says we can't pull the image locally because it's not on Docker Hub, so we need to do Docker login. Well, actually, I need to Docker login. Help! I'm actually winging it right now. So Docker login, we need to pass in a username password. And I'm not seeing. So let's do AZ ACR login. I believe the name of our Azure Container Registry instance. This allows us to log into the container registry is and I'm just kind of doing something Reactor on the 6. So AZ ACR login name Reactor on the 6. We're logging into our Azure Container Registry instance, just like you would do Docker login. All right. So I should be able to Docker run Reactor on the 6. There we go. Pulling it from my container registry. And I'm super nervous because I'm technically, this is not part of the show notes. I'm not part of today's demo, but I felt bad about the container. Oh, it's running on the website. It needed time. That's what it needed. But just to show, I'm running it on my local machine, localhost 6000. Actually, that 6000 port I chose. Yep, port 6000. There's Reactor on the 6. Open a browser. So I'll definitely have to do some debugging and update these show notes. It's something that's causing it not to run locally and be delayed when running a container instance. But that's a problem with my application, not a problem with this GitHub Actions workflow or this Bicep templates. Those work beautifully. Not a single bug there. I just had a buggy application. That's the wonderful thing about automating our deployments, right? We can fix the bugs in our application. And now we know that this whole build built push workflow is going to work beautifully. So thank you so much for hanging with us for all three parts of this series. We endeavored to do something pretty crazy here. I'm sure somebody's gonna put in YouTube comments, Sydney, for the running it locally, you missed step X or step Y. They'll probably say, Sydney should have chose port 6000, should have chose, I don't know, port 5500. They'll call out something that I completely missed, and then we'll all just have a nice little laugh. There we go. I had the wrong port number. So that's the wonderful thing about YouTube. People will come in later and tell us what we did wrong. So I'm really closing this time. I keep saying I'm going to close. Thank you all again for joining us. Thank you all for hanging in there. I think Rebecca's going to jump on and talk about our survey. But this has been really fun, really challenging. You saw we got the ad lib a little bit towards the end. And ad libbing is always the most fun part.
Thank you so much, Sydney. That was great. I'm glad that you figured it out at the end there. Coming through. I mean, that's the fun of live coding, I guess, and everything, is that there's always the caveats, and it's a learning experience, though, I think, and it makes it more interesting because then you go through the troubleshooting steps to figure out maybe what the issue was. So it definitely, it brings extra to the experience, I think, personally.
Absolutely.
I've been tinkering. I'm non-technical, so I've been looking at some sessions and things, curious about coding and everything. And I feel like on the pre-recorded, people are so accustomed to just knowing the information that they don't think about like little hiccups that come along the way. And so it's like I'm always ending up reaching out to somebody to be like, wait, they didn't cover this. What do I do? So I think that's the nice aspect of the live session. So thank you again for running this series, and also the other series last month as well. You contributed a lot this past month, and we really appreciate all of that. And thank you to our audience for tuning in. If you're not familiar with the Reactor, if you happen to have just been browsing on YouTube and came across this session, do check us out. We are a community-based event. We host lots of free content on a weekly basis, currently all virtual, although we will be having hybrid sessions coming up in the next few weeks on our localized level. So we have 12 physical locations around the world. You can find us on meetup.com if you search for the Microsoft Reactor. And then just find the location that's closest to you or a time zone that works for you, and check it all out. So at this time, I think we'll wrap it up. It doesn't seem like there was any questions that came through in the chat at the end there. So thank you, everyone. Take care. Thank you again, Sydney. Bye.